Welcome to the What I Wish I Knew After Pregnancy Loss podcast. I am your host, Shana Southern. I am an angel mum, a rainbow mum, a pregnancy loss practitioner, and trauma-informed coach. I created the Institute of Healing Through Pregnancy Loss out of my own experience with loss in the hopes to provide understanding and healing, educating people on pregnancy loss, and creating more women or men in trained support roles. In this podcast, I hope to shed light on what I wish I knew in relation to pregnancy loss, opening up the conversation, breaking the stigma, and bringing real-life stories plus guest experts. Thank you for being here with me today, and let's dive into today's episode. Welcome, beautiful souls. So today I have the gorgeous Jessica with me. Jessica is a children's grief expert. So knowing how we can talk to children navigating grief is a really valuable piece of knowledge and depth of understanding and how we can talk to them. So welcome, Jessica. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be with all of you guys. And I think really to start, I would love to share a little bit more about me and what has brought me into this world of grief. I think everybody who enters the world of grief has a story behind that. So I would love to share that with you. And then we can get to talking about supporting grieving children through pregnancy and infant loss, because it's something that's not talked about a lot, especially one, pregnancy and infant loss is not talked about enough. And two, children are often the forgotten grievers, especially within pregnancy and infant loss. So a little bit about me. I have been a certified child life specialist for 15 years. I know that title, certified child life specialist, has a little bit of a different name in different countries. So I believe in Australia, it's hospital play specialist, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. So there are some different titles for different countries. I know Italy has its own name, and there are some that are health play specialist is another name. So essentially what I do as a certified child life specialist is I help children cope with difficult life experiences. Within my 15 years of practice, 14 of those were in the hospital setting. I have been in private practice for that last year. And within the hospital setting, I spent the first 5 years of my career in pediatric intensive care units, first in the pediatric cardiovascular intensive care unit, then in a general pediatric intensive care unit. So of course, I was seeing a lot of grief there, a lot of loss, a lot of death, just grief in general, with things being totally unexpected. Even if things didn't end poorly, there was so much grief, obviously, in the ICU. So that's always been a passion of mine. I've worked in other settings. I've been in the pediatric emergency room, general peds units, and also in surgical areas. So I've kind of dabbled in a lot of different areas, but really what brought me into this world is halfway through my child life career, I was on the other side. I became a bereaved mom. So I have gone through 6 pregnancy losses, which it's hard every single time to say that because it's so much. 5 of those were in the first trimester. And then the one that I talk about the most is my daughter, Maggie. She died at 22 weeks, secondary to brain and spinal abnormalities. So I talk about her a lot. I like to say that she's like the spokesperson for all of the pregnancy losses that we had. So she's my little spokesperson. I am also an author. I have written several children's books. One of them is currently published. 3 are in the works. And I have my first published book I just translated it into Spanish. So that's going to be released within the next couple of weeks. I just got the proof of it back today. So I'm really excited about that. And that book that I published is called Forever Connected, and it's a book for bereaved siblings. So it's available worldwide on Amazon and in some other places as well. Just a few other details. I work with families virtually, really from around the globe, and in-person sessions if they're local to me. So really working with children of all ages through therapeutic sessions to help them process their grief situations. So when I went through my own grief experiences, and what I think a lot of people go through is they find one of two things. They want to run the other direction and not have anything to do with grief or loss, or it's just too much for them and they don't want any reminders, or that like lights this fuel, this fire is born inside of them and they want to help other families like them. And they want to be in this space where they're in it to help support. And that's really what I ran to. It's my way of parenting my daughter and it's what fills me. So there's no right or wrong way. That's just what it is for me. And that's really how I got into this world. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you.
One of the most important places that we can start is statistics. I think most people have heard the pregnancy and infant loss statistic that 1 in 4 pregnancies end in loss. Many of those pregnancies are not the first for expectant parents, so there are siblings that are there. This statistic just came out yesterday or the day before this was published. 1 in 12 children will experience the death of either a parent or a sibling by the time that they are 18. I would imagine this statistic doesn't really do a great job of describing pregnancy losses. I think this is really a statistic that looks at perhaps infants and above, maybe even not even capturing like those newborn losses. So I would imagine the statistic is a lot higher. Previously, this statistic was 1 in 13 last year. So this statistic, unfortunately, is constantly rising. And there's a lot more behind the statistic. The statistic doesn't tell the full story. It doesn't show the layers of grief, the trauma, the stress, the anxiety, the confusion that's faced. So we'll dive into that a little bit more and see, what things look like and feel like for the 1 in 12 or the 1 in 4, or however you want to look at it, or somewhere in between.
No more feeling like support isn't available to you. No more feeling alone and suffering in silence. No more years of therapy and walking away feeling like something is missing. You have the safe space to take off your mask, feel seen, validated, understood, and supported. Introducing the self-healing immersion after pregnancy loss, an empowering and transformative 6-week program designed to guide you, the angel mom or dad, on a journey from immense heartache and emotional overwhelm to finding clarity, peace, and calm in your heart, mind, and body. In this program, you'll discover the 6 key elements that unlock healing and help you return to love for yourself and your life. Join us on the self-healing immersion journey and embark on a path of profound healing and self-discovery. Find clarity, peace, and the ability to navigate life's challenges with grace. Don't wait any longer to embrace the life you deserve. Join the self-healing immersion. To enroll into the program, visit our website at www.shanasouthern.com. Follow along on the podcast Instagram page at pregnancyloss_podcast to learn more or find the link in my bio to enroll. And subscribe to the What I Wish I Knew After Pregnancy Loss podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Start your journey towards clarity, peace, and returning to love today. I am ready to guide you.
So mostly we're going to be talking about helping children cope with pregnancy and infant loss in the family today. But I also think it's important to mention that children can also be grieving so much more than those pieces. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to be using the word bereaved sibling, but it can be any child within the family affected by the loss. It could be cousins, it could be close friends, really any child in that family unit, whatever is defined as the family unit. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to say bereaved siblings, but it can be interchangeable for any child that's close in the family. And thinking through those other layers of grief, I want you to think of some of the secondary losses and those additional layers that can occur. So things that can go in tandem or hand in hand with pregnancy loss. Things like sometimes people are changing schools or moving towns or states, or different friendship dynamics or family dynamics, or perhaps even separation of certain family members because the statistics of parents who end up getting separated after a pregnancy loss can be much higher. So just thinking through that, the word grief is not just with pregnancy loss. It's not just with death. There are so many other layers that can go into that. So just keep that in mind. So we can start with some myths related to kids' grief. So there is this perception that, or maybe misconception, that some kids are too young to grieve. But really any child at any age, even infants, they can grieve. Really a child old enough to love is old enough to grieve. For example, so infants know their primary caregivers. So they know when something has changed. Perhaps their mom has been at the hospital on bed rest due to a risky pregnancy, or mom is at home grieving the death of a baby or a pregnancy loss, and they can sense when something is different. They see the tears. They see the slight shift in the routines and the shift in the energy around them. And they feel that. And they're wondering, well, what's going on? And often they become more clingy. They can be a lot more irritable. They can have sleep regressions. So they're seeing that things are shifting and they're reacting to that. So they're not too young to grieve at any age. Another thing is people have this idea that children don't grieve as much because they don't understand as much. And actually, it can be a little bit harder for kids the grief can feel a little heavier because they don't understand as much and they're putting pieces together not in the right way. So they grieve just as much. They just might show it differently. They might show it in more of a behavioral reaction, or they might show it differently because they are taking it in small little bits and pieces. And it's not this all-encompassing type of grief all the time. So that's another one. One that I hear all the time is, oh, kids are resilient. They're just going to bounce back. Almost as a like, oh, you don't need to worry about them. They're fine type of thing. And kids can be resilient, but it's not all on their own. They need somebody to tell them what's going on. They need somebody to help them learn some coping strategies to get through the difficult thing. So they're not going to just bounce back on their own. And also bouncing back, there are certain situations where you don't just bounce back. You're never going to be the same person as you were before. And pregnancy loss is one of those things where things aren't just going to bounce back. You're going to be a new person after your pregnancy loss. And so are your children. They're going to be different after that experience too. So there's that one. And then I know a lot of people just want to protect their kids from painful things. And they think, oh, kids they're too young for these big topics and conversations. So we'll brush it to the side. We'll talk about it when they're older, but they hear things and they observe what's going on in their environment. And when they're not told about what's going on, then they start to come up with their own ideas. And often it means that they're figuring things out on their own. And then the last one that I have here is people think that when they speak about the baby that died, it's going to make things harder. And that kind of goes hand in hand with like wanting to protect them. And what we know is that when we're open about things and create that space for kids to ask questions and talk about memories and just really be a part of things, then it does quite the opposite. It helps them cope and understand with their situation. And then we can explore a little bit of, well, how does grief show up in children? Because it is different. So the way that kids understand things or the way that kids process grief is definitely different than adults in that they do grieve in these small bite-sized pieces. So adults, when they have something that they are grieving, it is this all-encompassing, deep process that is like full mind, body, everything. And it's a really dark time. And kids just do not have the brain capacity yet to live in that space that long. So they take it in bite-sized pieces. And what this can look like is perhaps a parent is telling their child that the baby died. The child might ask one or two questions related to that news and then just go directly back to playing and being totally silly. And often the parent's like, did they just understand what I told them? Or are they like, something's not clicking? And it doesn't necessarily mean that. It could mean that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It could be that That's as much as they could handle in that moment. And they'll come back to it. Sometimes it does mean that they need a lot of repetition before it all clicks and makes sense. So here are some other things that can happen. They often have behavioral responses. They might become more irritable, more angry at things that seem totally unrelated, more meltdowns or tantrums, or just a bigger attitude. So often kids will not be outwardly sharing their grief feelings. They're not going to come up and say, I feel really sad. That's just not how it works. They rather will act them out in their behaviors, and they might not even really know how they feel or why they feel or be able to like verbalize or name it. And to be honest, a lot of adults can't do this either. So if we're expecting children to do this, that's not very fair because we as adults can hardly figure out our own feelings. So it's normal for kids, and you guys maybe have seen this. It's normal for kids to re-grieve as they get older. So for example, let's say the death happened when a child was 3. When they are 6 or 9 or 12, they often will reprocess and re-grieve the situation, but they're now in a new developmental stage. So they can understand things at a deeper level. So a lot of times when they enter these new developmental stages, a lot of questions come up again. And they want to hear the story again. What happened? How did this happen? There will be additional questions that they didn't ask before because now they are old enough to conceptualize more abstract thoughts. And sometimes certain stages of life will add these new like re-grieving processes. So perhaps, things that they see in their environment with siblings doing certain things. And then it reminds them of their brother or sister that should be here if things went a different way. So there are certain things that can prompt that re-grieving in addition to the developmental stages, just things that they see in their environment that can place them into that re-grieving process. And then just like adults, kids don't grieve on any specific timeline. We can't force their grief emotions out. We can provide space and they'll come out when they're ready to come out. Just like with adults, we can have the supportive measures there, and when they're ready, they will come out. Do you guys have any examples of this, some of these things coming up in either your personal or professional worlds? Feel free to share. You can unmute and share.
Well, for me, like it's a personal thing. So when you said about the new developmental stages of growth will bring re-grief, like the re-grieving process again, like I see that in my son, like I shared beforehand, his idea of what he thought had happened, and now he's come out and said what he thought had happened, and then I had to correct him with the story he was telling himself that he thought of how she passed away. And then like he only just learnt about our the last baby that we lost. Like we always, I guess like for us it was a really confusing time for him. So we didn't tell him that I lost the baby, but we used to honour John all the time. And we used to just say, when you're a little bit older, we'll explain to you who he is. But we used to have we've got Christmas balls that we put on our tree with all the children's name. And he was like, well, who's John? And I'd be like, I'll explain it to you when you're a little bit older. And last year he was old enough to know about it, and he just looked at me and he goes, oh wow, Mum, you and Dad have been through so much. And I'm like, so he's a very sensitive child as well. On top of that, he's a little bit older in him compared to an average 10-year-old because he's had to deal with such big adult life things of losing his sister, but then none of his friends have been through that. So I feel like he's had to grow. But I see a lot of the behavioural response, for instance, he went through that whole stage of separation anxiety. But I also see that with Hope as well. Like our daughter, she wasn't here when Sophia passed away. So I see her processing it as well. So I see her feel sad,
It's very interesting looking at children born after loss, those subsequent children, and looking at the experiences compared to the children that were alive during the loss. And I actually don't see a huge difference in a lot of kids. with the children born before or after the loss. I mean, the family unit is the same. For many of the families, they still, or most of the families, I would say, they still talk about their babies that died, and the children born before or after, it's all part of their family. And the children go through a grief process no matter what their birth order was. So of course, there are some things that are a little bit different, but all in all, I see more similarities than differences in children that are, on different sides of the spectrum with their birth order.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I feel like Hope, like for my daughter, like I look at her and she has missed that significant part of life, so she wants to be able to meet her sister. Like, yeah, she continuously, like, I reckon she was out of both the children, I thought it would be Jax more than her, but up until probably last year, she used to like look outside our window. Like, we've got a 2-story house, and she'd be upstairs in the kitchen, in the lounge that we've got upstairs. And she would be yelling out to the sky, speaking to Sophia. And then where were we? We were somewhere. You know how you can get those flowers that you make a wish, you blow in it,
Oh,
so
yeah.
we had those, and she made a wish, and she goes, it probably won't come true. And I was like, what did you wish for? She goes, I just wish that Sophia could come down and play with me for a while.
Oh.
And I was like
so touching. And
yeah,
it's like those bittersweet moments where you are like so full of love that your kids have this relationship with each other, even this relationship that is connected, even though one is here on earth and one has died. So that's the sweet part, but it's also so sad that they are experiencing this, and this is the reality. And that's, it's a very bittersweet moment for sure. So I have a few more things of how grief shows up in children. So kids often need a lot of repetition before it makes sense. And some of this sometimes happens with time and developmental stages. Sometimes kids will ask over and over and over again to hear the story about what happened. I actually have 2 clients right now. One's a 3-year-old and one's a 6-year-old, and both of them ask their parent almost every night to tell them the story of how their sibling died. And that repetition, it is so painful for the parents to do, but it is so important for the kids, because over time, everything clicks and makes sense. So I really feel for when that is happening, because it can be exhausting as a parent, but it is also really important and developmentally appropriate for kids. So, these kids, when they're asking these questions, it's not necessarily uncommon for these kids to like pat their mom's belly after the baby has died and say baby, and they're trying to make sense of it all. And again, that is so painful for that mother who just went through that pregnancy loss to have that reminder of like that constant like pat on her belly and being like, no baby, no more, baby's not there anymore, especially with the younger kids. But that's part of the developmentally appropriate way of how they're making sense of it. So I think it is important to note that all kids are their own unique individuals, just like adults. So some kids won't fit into these like neat little developmentally norm boxes that the books say. So I have seen kids under the age of 2 that totally understand the permanency of their siblings' death, despite what the books will say that's impossible. But I've seen it over and over again. And I've also seen teenagers that have misconceptions about death. A couple years ago, I had a young teen that thought that their baby sister died because their mom had gone into a cold pool. And this teenager said, my mom killed the baby because she went into this cold pool. And he was so angry because he thought his mom caused the baby's death in utero. And so we talked about that and helped clear up that misconception, and he let that anger go. But like, how sad was it that like he was putting all this blame on his mom for something that was not even related to why the baby died. So kids, can certainly fall in a huge range of what is normal, but having that opportunity to hear and explore what is going on in their minds can help us have that place to clear up those misconceptions and help them. And then really the last point on here is play. Play is how children learn and process the world in which they live. So kids need play as much as they need sleep. That play can help them. It can be a space of comfort. It can be a space to process and connect and just release. It can be an escape for them. It's whatever is needed for the child in that space and time. They will naturally go to what is needed for them. So I always encourage people to just follow the lead of the child and provide space to have that happen. It's also very normal for kids to play through death, which I know can look really shocking for adults. And sometimes they want to like kind of redirect and be like, oh, no, that's not something that we play. But it's really healthy for them. It helps them understand their world and what happened and maybe perhaps what they wish had happened. So just let it play out. These are a few simple common misconceptions that children have about death and dying. Kids are often, especially little ones, are often very egocentric, and they think that whatever happened can happen to them or that they caused these things to happen. So things like, I didn't want a new brother or sister. I must have made this happen. Or I don't want to catch what they had. Or if people use certain terminology, sometimes they're afraid to go to sleep because they think that they're going to die. And this can especially come up with sleep-related deaths because unfortunately, that is one of the ways that babies can die with sudden infant death syndrome. So there are things there that can be kind of just heavy and mixed with a lot of fear and anxiety. So just a few misconceptions that are pretty common. I briefly want to go over this. These are just some common questions that come up for grieving kids. So we can be proactive with some of these things. Again, can I catch it? If we don't proactively clear up some of these questions, they're going to create their own conclusions. So we want to try and do that for them. Could I have changed it? Did I cause it? What is it? How did they die? So we want to give very simple, concrete information about this.
I think one of the things that you spoke about too was, when you were talking about obviously the terminology with the sleep, when obviously with SIDS, it is sleep related. But when you were also, I saw something once when you said, they were born sleeping, so stillbirth babies.
Yeah.
And again, it's that, that fear for the child, if I go to sleep, I might die because they take everything so literally.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about, from what I gather, it's about sort of obviously talking to them in a way that they'll understand it, but using the right terminology as well so that they're not actually getting that sort of, I guess.
That magical thinking that can come up. Yeah, actually, in like one more slide, we're going to explore some of those terms because that is such a huge thing. And there are so many terms out there, especially for pregnancy loss, that can be so confusing for kids. So we'll touch base on that in just a moment. With this slide, I just wanted to briefly just illustrate what common things that are said and how they can just they can just rub the wrong way and what we can try instead. So it's a common saying to say they're no longer in pain, or they're in a better place, or I know what you're going through, or you're so strong. Like all of those things, they're not really helpful. So we can see, what is this bringing up for them? It's so different for everyone. So just reframing it to have more of a learning of what is this like for you versus, it must be like ... or you should be ... So just more of a learning experience with how to see where they're at in the moment and meet them right where they're at instead of trying to like fix or lessen the pain. So I had a little activity, but in the interest of time, I think we will kind of breeze through this and get straight to all of the terms. We're going to have a moment to jot down all of the different phrases that we've heard people talk about with death without saying all the D words: death, died, dying, because there are a lot of them. So how about if we take just a moment where anybody can unmute and we can just say all of the terms that you guys know of that are saying death or died in any other way other than using all the D words. So things that are related to perinatal loss or death in general. So feel free, unmute. list them off.
I've gone to heaven. So like, when people have used the phrase, I've used the phrase, but I've always said, they've died and gone to heaven. I guess if you just leave out the D word, it just makes it sound like they've just gone to another town and that they can that they can fly. Like I remember Jack saying to me, "Oh, look, we can catch a plane."
I know sometimes people will say like up in the stars or in the sky.
Yeah. What else has there been that I can't think of it. Can you, Shana?
I was actually going to say it's funny, I use passed away a lot. And I'm like, you really don't know, like, I don't know how that could be taken. Like they've just passed, like maybe they've walked past or they've just gone, like, but and they'll come back.
I think a lot of kids with passed away is either like confusing, like what do they mean by that? Or the closest thing that they know is passed out. Like they just were knocked unconscious, passed out. So it's just confusing to them. Like, what does that mean exactly?
I was thinking about it, like how they could interpret it. It was confusing me. And then obviously, in the stars, because my dad was an astronomer and my dad died when I was 19. So I often will go, I'll say, I'll talk to the stars. I go to the stars and I talk to the stars. So that's where my baby is, like it's in the stars. And then so I'll say to her, we'll look up to the sky and we'll talk to the stars. But and
there can certainly be like the time and the place for like that connection, but it's not in like the initial time of like helping them understand what actually happened. So like, it's not that all euphemisms are like totally bad. It's not, because there are certain things that once kids have a great understanding of what death means, then there can be some of those connectors of like looking at the sky and talking to your baby brother or baby sister. And so there can be some of those pieces that play in, but it can be very confusing when they don't have a good understanding of what things mean with a death. So, and then there are other terms like there's like, we lost the baby. That is probably the most common thing that I hear, at least here in the States, is we lost the baby. And what every young child would take with that, the most literal way of that is like, where are they? Are they playing hide and seek? Like, let's go get them. Or the baby's gone, or like all of these terms that make it seem like the baby's just somewhere else right now. And we're going to go pick them up in a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I just thought of. They're not with us anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, which is like, well, they're not with us right now, but they'll come back.
Yeah. Or they went to a better place, or like, all of those terms can be like, okay, well, we'll just go to that place then. Let's go get them.
Sounds better than where we are. So let's go.
Yeah.
Death and dead, like it feels like it's like you're swearing at your child, doesn't it? Like, I mean, I have always used the word death and dead, but again, Jax was a very different child. Like, after Sophia died, his grandparents died. Like, so he was, But I've always used the word death and dead, followed by, like, there's a star in the sky. Look, we've got given 1,000 stars, as a thoughtful present. When Sophia died, people were purchasing stars. So, but I always call it like like instead of going to a cemetery and seeing a stone, like I always say to the kids, if you look up to the sky, you'll be able to remember things here,
and for a lot of people, that's like a lot more peaceful for them to think about. And I think that's the reason why people use euphemisms, because they're softer words. They don't seem as heavy. But the more we use death and died and dying, like all the D words, the more we use them, the less like power they have, I guess. The less of like a cuss word they feel like. They're not dirty words. They just are. It's what it is. And I know for a lot of people, it takes them time to get to that point to say those words, and that's okay. I don't ever correct if there's a bereaved person that wants to use the word, we lost the baby or my baby passed away. I don't correct them. However, if there are young children in the house, I will always say, when you're talking around your kids or when you're, trying to tell them what happened, it is really helpful to use clear, concrete words like death and dying so that they don't have misconceptions that come up, because there are a lot of misconceptions that can come from these words up at the top. Things like we had an angel. That can be so confusing. Like, what does that even mean to a child? Does that mean that like a little angel's flying around, or stillborn? I know we talked about this one a little bit. A lot of kids will break that word up and be like, well, they were stillborn. Where are they? Or they were too sick, and having that as the description, they were just too sick and they died, then can make a child fear getting a cold or a virus. So if we can really break it down and have a little bit more information saying their heart was too sick or their brain wasn't formed properly, or giving a little bit more than they were just sick, because then that can create these other fears that come up when they get sick, because we all get sick sometimes. So we can just be a little bit more descriptive, and we don't need to have like this big long paragraph about what happened, but a sentence or two with quick information is really helpful. I think we pretty much just went over a lot of this, but just using concrete language, nothing that's too abstract or has double meanings. We want to anticipate the common misconceptions and fears that come up. So helping kids understand that death is different than sleeping at night. There can be that confusion again. If it was a sleep-related death, that can be something that has a lot of fear and anxiety. So clearing that up, that this is, not something that typically happens. And if there is a known reason, like let's say there was a blanket in the bed, or the baby wasn't in the right sleep position, or those type of things, that can be said. And then even things like going to the hospital. Some kids might have this misconception that because somebody in their family died because they went to the hospital, they might have this misconception that anytime somebody goes to the hospital, they die. And we want to clear these things up before they become fears and misconceptions. So any place that we can proactively answer common questions and help to prevent misconceptions from coming up, that's certainly what we want to do.
To listen to the full interview, I'd love to have you inside the Pregnancy Loss Practitioner membership. Click the application link in the show notes if you feel drawn to creating more support in the pregnancy loss space and become a pregnancy loss practitioner. Thank you for listening in with me today. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you did, I would absolutely love to hear from you. Take a screenshot of this episode, share it to social media, and tag me at Institute of Healing_PL. I love seeing what is resonating with you right now. If you want to chat further, I invite you to connect with me through Instagram. Head over and follow my Instagram account, send me a DM, and let's open the communication. If you want to know more about how you can be the support for others, head to the show notes and fill out the application form for the Pregnancy Loss Practitioner certification. I want to also note here that what I share within the episodes is not medical advice. If you need further support, please consult your doctor. Thank you again. Much love to you. Be gentle with yourself, and I look forward to supporting you on the next episode.